Chapter 1. A door opened too wide. The night had started like any other, just another quiet, uneventful evening in the small, earthbound town of Crescent Hollow, nestled between dense woodlands and an endless stretch of sky. The town itself wasn't much, just a handful of street lamps flickering against the darkness, dimly lit diners still open past midnight, and rows of houses that seemed to settle into the earth, blending seamlessly into the sleepy atmosphere of the countryside. It was the kind of place where nothing extraordinary ever happened, where the greatest excitement was the occasional lost tourist looking for a shortcut through the forests, or maybe a stubborn fox that refused to leave someone's backyard. And that was exactly why I lived here. Life had never been particularly adventurous for me. I liked it that way. My job as a freelance programmer allowed me to work from home. My groceries were delivered straight to my door, and I could go weeks, sometimes months, without needing to talk to another person face to face. I had made a comfortable routine for myself. Wake up, work for a few hours, eat something barely passable as a meal, then unwind with a book or an old sci-fi movie before falling asleep, only to repeat the same thing the next day. So, when I heard a knock at my door that night, I hesitated. I wasn't expecting anyone. It was past midnight. No one ever came to my house, especially not unannounced. At first, I thought maybe it was just the wind, rattling against the old wooden porch, or perhaps some curious animal bumping into the door. But then, the knock came again, 3 firm raps against the wood, deliberate, unhurried, but unmistakably human in nature. My stomach tightened. I stood from my couch, my mind cycling through possibilities. A lost traveler? A neighbor in need? Maybe someone trying to sell me something, despite the ungodly hour? None of those seemed likely. I glanced toward the peephole, but for some reason, I hesitated before looking through it. Something deep in my gut told me that whatever was on the other side of that door wasn't going to be ordinary. And I was right. The moment I opened it, the moment I made that one small, irreversible mistake, my entire life changed. Standing on my doorstep was a woman unlike anyone I had ever seen before. Tall, easily a full head taller than me. Her skin shimmered under the porch light, a faint iridescent glow shifting between deep shades of violet and silver. Her hair, if you could even call it that, was long and flowing, but it didn't move like normal hair. It rippled, almost like liquid silk, faintly bioluminescent at the edges, trailing down past her shoulders. Her eyes were the most startling part, large, luminous, and completely devoid of pupils, swirling instead with a mix of galactic hues, blues and golds, and shifting constellations that seemed to stretch into infinity. They were mesmerizing in a way that made my breath catch in my throat, my body frozen in place as those celestial orbs studied me, as if sifting through my very existence with a single glance. She wore something that looked half ceremonial, half battle-ready, a deep, dark blue garment embroidered with alien symbols, fastened together with a metallic sash. The material looked far too advanced for anything crafted by human hands, a mix of form-fitting elegance and practicality, like something meant for both diplomacy and combat. She looked dangerous, yet undeniably beautiful, and she was staring at me. The silence between us stretched for what felt like an eternity, until finally, she tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. Then, in a voice that was both soft and commanding, she spoke. "You opened your door to me, human. Do you accept the union?" I blinked. The what? I must have misheard her. The what now? I asked, my voice coming out far less composed than I would have liked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a single step forward, and I instinctively moved back, though my body wasn't entirely sure whether it was from fear or some strange, magnetic pull toward her presence. "Your invitation has been acknowledged," she continued, her glowing gaze unyielding. "By the laws of my people, you have willingly offered hospitality to an unbonded traveler. The rights of companionship dictate that I am now bound to you. And you dash," her voice lowered slightly, her words taking on a more solemn weight, "are now bound to me." I just stared at her. There was no way this was happening. This had to be some kind of dream, or a bizarre prank, or maybe I had finally gone insane from too much isolation. But no matter how many times I blinked, no matter how hard I tried to convince myself that this wasn't real, she remained exactly where she was, her presence as solid and unwavering as the ground beneath my feet. "Okay, hold on." I lifted a hand as if physically trying to slow this conversation down. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I was just dash. I paused. What was I even going to say? That I was just opening my door because I was curious? That I didn't actually mean to invite an alien warrior woman into my home? That I didn't expect my act of basic human politeness to result in some kind of cosmic marriage proposal? She blinked slowly, then nodded, as if coming to some sort of internal realization. Ah, I see now. You were unaware of the implications. I let out a short, humorless laugh, rubbing the back of my neck. Yeah, just a bit. Another moment of silence passed between us, and then unexpectedly her expression softened, just the slightest bit. It is rare for one to offer such hospitality unknowingly, but the customs remain. The bond has been acknowledged. I am yours now, and you are mine. My brain was short-circuiting. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. And yet, as I stood there, rooted to the spot, looking up at this otherworldly woman who had just declared herself mine, I had the overwhelming, gut-wrenching, terrifying feeling that I had just made a decision that could never be undone. I had invited her in, and now, whether I liked it or not, she was never leaving. Chapter 2. A bond that cannot be broken. The house felt different now, as if the very air had changed in some imperceptible way, something beneath the surface of reality shifting and rearranging itself into a shape I could not yet comprehend. The alien woman, Valari, stood in my living room, her presence both ethereal and imposing, her towering frame casting long, soft-edged shadows against the dim lighting of the space. Her golden eyes held something unreadable, something ancient and patient, something that saw beyond my comprehension but still waited, expectant, as if testing whether I would rise to meet the moment or falter beneath it. I wanted to ask her 1,000 things: where she had come from, why she had chosen to step into my home, what possible series of misunderstandings had led to the outrageous claim that I had just bound myself to an alien marriage pact, but words failed me in the weight of her presence, the sheer magnitude of what had just unfolded. The room felt smaller than before, more enclosed, the space between us charged with an energy I could not name, as if some unseen current had drawn a circle around us, trapping us inside the boundaries of a ritual far older than anything my species had ever known. I tried to step back, to put some distance between us, but she moved in perfect synchronization, as if drawn forward by an invisible thread that now bound her to me, and I realized with a slow, creeping dread that I could feel it to a pull at the edge of my perception, a warmth that had not been there moments before, a presence lingering just beneath my skin, deep in my bones, in the space where my own thoughts began and ended. It wasn't invasive, wasn't forceful, but it was there, undeniable and absolute. A connection that had been woven into existence the moment I had spoken the words she had misunderstood, the words that had sealed something irrevocable between us. Her voice, smooth as silk yet carrying the weight of unshakable certainty, broke through the silence as she tilted her head ever so slightly, her expression a perfect blend of curiosity and quiet amusement, as if she found my reaction fascinating, as if she were watching a creature newly hatched from its shell, blinking against the brightness of a world it had not yet learned to navigate. "You are afraid," she said, and it was not a question, but an observation, spoken with the clarity of someone who understood fear but had long since ceased to be ruled by it. I wanted to deny it, to laugh it off as absurd, but the weight in my chest told me the truth, and for a moment, I hated how easily she had seen through me, how effortlessly she had peeled back the mask of bravado I had tried to summon in the wake of the impossible. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to steady even as my mind screamed for explanations that refused to come. "I'm not afraid," I lied, and she did not call me out on it, only watched me with those golden eyes, patient, waiting, giving me space to wrestle with the enormity of what had just happened. I needed to understand, needed something to anchor me to reality, and so I grasped at the one thing that made sense: the need for clarity, for an explanation, for anything that could make this make sense. "What exactly does this mean?" I asked, my voice steadier now, though my hands were still clenched into fists at my sides, a useless attempt to ground myself. This bond, this pact, what does it actually entail?" Valari took a step closer, and though she moved with grace, with the fluidity of something otherworldly, the sheer density of her presence made it feel as if the room itself shifted around her, as if she bent space in ways I could not comprehend. In the ways of my people, she began, her voice carrying the weight of tradition, of something far older than myself, than my world, than my species. A verbal pact sealed in sincerity is irrevocable. To extend one's invitation is to extend one's soul, and to have that invitation accepted is to form a bond beyond blood, beyond time. Her eyes never left mine, searching, measuring, as if waiting to see whether I would reject this reality or embrace it. You have given me sanctuary, and in doing so, you have claimed me as yours, as I have now claimed you as mine. The link between us is woven, and to sever it would be. She paused, considering, as if seeking the right words to translate something untranslatable. It would be an unmaking, a wound that does not heal, a betrayal of the highest order. I inhaled sharply, trying to process the sheer weight of her words, the absolute certainty with which she spoke them. I had known her for less than an hour, and yet, in the eyes of her people, in the depth of the cosmic traditions that governed her existence, I had just bound myself to her for life. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence that stretched between us, and for a brief, fleeting moment, I wondered if I was still dreaming, if this was some elaborate trick of the mind conjured from exhaustion and too much caffeine. But I knew better. Everything about her was real. The pull between us was real. And if I thought I could find some way out of this, some loophole, some means of undoing what had just been done, the moment her hand brushed against mine, I knew there was none. The sensation was unlike anything I had ever felt before. It wasn't just a touch, it was a transmission, a pulse of warmth that spread through my skin and sank into my bones, a resonance that whispered not in words but in feeling, in connection, in something that transcended mere physical contact. It was as if I had been plugged into something larger than myself, as if some part of me that had been silent my entire life had just been awakened, responding instinctively to a bond one had never known existed. It was not a choice, not a decision I had made, it simply was, as undeniable as gravity, as immutable as time itself. Her fingers lingered against mine, her gaze steady, unwavering, as if she, too, had felt the confirmation of what she already knew to be true. And in that moment, I understood what she had meant. This wasn't just a cultural misunderstanding, wasn't just a matter of words spoken in ignorance. This was something deeper, something written into the very fabric of whatever force governed her kind, something as intrinsic as breathing, as inescapable as the tide. And now, it was a part of me, too. For the first time since this began, I saw a shift in her expression, something softer, something almost uncertain, as if she, too, was waiting to see how I would react, to see if I would reject the bond she had already accepted as fate. It was the first moment she looked almost vulnerable, and that, more than anything, was what made the panic inside me begin to settle. Because, terrifying as this was, I wasn't the only one caught in it. She was bound to me just as much as I was bound to her. Two souls, woven together by accident, by chance, by words that had reshaped the course of our lives in ways neither of us had anticipated. There was no undoing this. There was only the question of what came next. And as I looked into her eyes, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't ready to walk away. Chapter 3. The Consequences of Invitation. The silence in my house felt heavy, oppressive even, as the alien woman sat across from me, her piercing silver eyes studying me with the kind of intensity that made my skin prickle. The events of the past few hours replayed in my mind like a distorted recording. What had started as a simple act of hospitality, inviting a lost and confused traveler into my home, had spiraled into something far beyond my understanding. Now, I found myself trapped in a cultural misunderstanding of intergalactic proportions, with the alien woman Savan of the Zyrethian Dominion calmly explaining to me that, according to her species' traditions, I had proposed marriage to her. And worse, she had accepted. My fingers tightened around the ceramic mug in my hands, the tea inside having long gone cold. Savan, meanwhile, remained composed, her delicate hands folded in her lap, her shimmering blue skin reflecting the soft glow of my living room's overhead light. She was breathtaking in a way that was entirely unearthly, her form both graceful and powerful, like a sculpture of living metal, each movement deliberate, every breath measured. She wasn't human, but she carried herself with a regal presence that made it clear she was no ordinary visitor. "Let me get this straight," I finally said, setting the mug down with deliberate care. "You're telling me that, in your culture, offering someone shelter a simple invitation into my house is the same as asking them to be my wife?" Savon tilted her head, the silver rings in her elongated ears chiming softly with the motion. "More accurately, it is a declaration of intent," she said, her voice like the hum of a perfectly tuned instrument, effortlessly smooth yet rich with meaning. To invite an unbonded Zyrethian woman into one's personal dwelling, especially under conditions of safety and comfort, is an undeniable offer of union, one that I have formally recognized, as is my right. I exhaled sharply, rubbing my temples. This was insane. "But I didn't mean it like that," I said, voice edged with frustration. "It was just hospitality. Something humans do. If someone's lost or stranded, we help them. It doesn't mean we're getting married." Savon blinked at me, her expression unchanging. "Your intention does not alter the outcome. Among my people, intent is secondary to action. You offered shelter. You provided sustenance. You ensured my well-being. By Zyrethian law, those acts constitute a bond." I opened my mouth to argue but hesitated. There was something in the way she said, deep-rooted certainty, a finality that told me she wasn't just making this up. This was real. To her, at least. I let out a strained breath. "Okay. Hypothetically speaking, if I were to refuse dash." Savon's silver eyes flashed, and for the first time, her expression shifted from serene detachment to something colder, more dangerous. "Refusal," she said, each syllable measured, "is a grievous insult. A bond once formed cannot be broken without consequence." A chill ran down my spine. What kind of consequence? She was silent for a moment, as if debating how much to tell me. Then, slowly, she unfolded her hands and placed them on the table between us, her fingertips glowing faintly as they pressed against the smooth surface. "You have bound yourself to me under Zyrethian law. If you reject that bond, you reject not only me, but the honor of my lineage." I swallowed hard. "And that means?" Savon's gaze did not waver. "It means my kin will demand retribution." My heart nearly stopped. "Retribution? As in, they come after me?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Not just you," she said, her voice soft yet firm, an undeniable edge beneath the elegance. "They would come after everything you hold dear. Your home, your people, your world." I felt the blood drain from my face. "You're saying that if I refuse to marry you, your family, your species, will take that as an act of war?" Savon inclined her head slightly, her silver hair shimmering like liquid metal. "In essence, yes. A dishonored bond requires compensation, and the only compensation fitting for such a slight is reclamation through force." I leaned back in my chair, staring at her in disbelief. This had to be a nightmare. Some kind of elaborate cosmic joke. But as I sat there, watching the steady, unblinking certainty in her expression, I realized this was real. I was accidentally engaged to an alien woman, and if I said no, it could lead to the destruction of Earth. I groaned, running a hand through my hair. "This is insane. This is absolutely insane." "You are not incorrect," Savon said mildly. I shot her a look. "That doesn't help." She gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug. "It is not my place to soothe your discomfort, only to inform you of the reality of the situation." I exhaled sharply, staring at the ceiling. How the hell was I supposed to handle this? I was just a regular Gaia mechanic, a nobody, scraping by in a universe that barely noticed my existence. I wasn't a diplomat, wasn't a warrior. I had no political leverage, no power. And yet, here I was, apparently one wrong word away from triggering an interstellar conflict. I looked at Savon again. She was composed, patient, waiting for my response as if she already knew what I would say. And maybe she did. Maybe she understood something about this situation that I didn't. I swallowed, my voice quieter this time. "What? What happens if I accept?" Her expression softened slightly. "Then the bond is sealed. I would remain at your side as your consort, and our union would be recognized as legitimate by the Zyrethian Dominion. My kin would see it as a sign of goodwill between our peoples." "And if I refuse?" A pause. Then I return to my homeworld with dishonor, and my people will act accordingly. I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply, forcing my mind to process the impossible choice before me. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Earth. I had no idea what kind of military force the Xyrethians wielded, but I wasn't about to risk finding out firsthand. And even beyond that, there was something about the way Savan looked at me, something that told me this wasn't just political maneuvering. She was serious. She meant every word. I had to choose, and I had to choose now. I opened my eyes, meeting her gaze head-on. "All right," I said, the word heavy on my tongue. "Then I guess I don't have a choice." Savan's lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile. "You always have a choice, human. You just made the right one." I exhaled slowly. Somehow, I wasn't sure if that was true, but it was too late to turn back now. Chapter 4. The Vows That Bind Worlds. The sky above was no longer the familiar shade of deep indigo Ethan had grown used to seeing from his home. The stars, once distant and indifferent, now seemed closer, as if watching with quiet amusement at the chaos his life had become. The alien city stretched before him in intricate arches of bioluminescent towers, the roads beneath them weaving with floating pathways, illuminated by an eerie golden glow emanating from unseen sources. Everything here pulsed with a strange organic energy, as though the city itself was alive, breathing, observing him as much as he was observing it. He had spent the last 24 hours trying to wrap his mind around the impossible series of events that had led him to this moment, standing inside a foreign court of law, facing a council of alien dignitaries, accused of something he didn't even understand. His crime? Hospitality. Ethan barely held back a frustrated sigh as the council's deliberation continued in their alien tongue, their multi-voice discussions layered like an echo of thousands of murmuring whispers. He didn't need to understand their words to know what they were discussing: his fate. More accurately, the fate of his unintended bride, the alien woman who now stood beside him, her expression calm, serene, yet betraying the faintest glimmer of unease beneath the surface. Her name was Zyara, a name that had been casually spoken when she first introduced herself on Earth, back when he had assumed she was just some lost traveler in need of help, back when he was still blissfully unaware of what offering a seat at his table truly meant in her culture. Now, here he was on her world, inside their governing halls, standing before an eldritch tribunal of elders, facing the consequences of what he had unknowingly set into motion. Ethan turned slightly to glance at Zyara. She met his gaze briefly, her striking violet eyes gleaming with something unreadable. Regret? Amusement? Concern? He couldn't tell. A sudden chime echoed through the chamber, pulling his attention back to the towering figure seated at the highest point of the tribunal. The elder's translucent robes shimmered like liquid crystal, shifting colors in response to every subtle movement of their ancient, elongated form. The council leader's voice, layered, melodic, yet possessing an undeniable authority, spoke in slow, deliberate universal standard, making sure Ethan could understand every single word. Human Ethan Calloway, you have initiated a binding ritual through an act of indisputable hospitality. You have acknowledged the sacred customs of our people. The tribunal finds that you are now beholden to the ancient vows of the Veldari Accord. You are bound to Zyara. As is the law, the bond must either be fulfilled or broken in a trial by right. Ethan exhaled sharply. So much for diplomacy. He had tried explaining, repeatedly, tried to make them understand that his invitation was not intentional, that he had no knowledge of their customs, that he never intended to propose to anyone, let alone a stranger from another world. But every argument he presented was met with the same unyielding truth. The Veldari did not see this as something that could be undone with words. To them, words held power, and actions held even more. And Ethan had, without realizing it, enacted an ancient, sacred promise with a single gesture. An offer of food and shelter in their culture, the deepest, most solemn vow of union. To them, he had proposed marriage the moment he had invited Zyara into his home. And now, he was left with two choices: honor the bond and become her mate, or challenge the ruling through a rite of combat. The entire situation was so absurdly beyond comprehension that Ethan almost wanted to laugh. But there was no humor in this, not really. Not when the decision he made next would change his life forever. He took a slow breath, Turning to Zyara, his voice lower, meant only for her. Tell me there's a way out of this that doesn't involve me dying in some ridiculous arena fight. Zyara's lips quirked in the faintest ghost of a smile. I could win for you, but that would be seen as weakness on your part. Ethan groaned. Of course it would. Zyara's expression grew more serious. They are not trying to punish you, Ethan, but they cannot ignore what has happened. My people are bound by traditions older than many of the stars above us. Once a bond is formed, it cannot simply be disregarded. The rite is not meant to be a punishment, but a choice. A trial to prove the sincerity of one's commitment. Right. Because nothing says sincerity like beating someone into the ground. She tilted her head. You wouldn't be fighting another person. Ethan frowned. Then who the hell am I supposed to fight? The moment she opened her mouth to answer, the chamber's central holo display activated, projecting an image of the trial grounds, a vast, open-air coliseum ringed with luminous crystalline pillars, its arena floor marked with shifting hexagonal platforms that reconfigured themselves in unpredictable patterns. And in the center of that shifting battlefield, a creature twice the size of an earth lion, its scaled body pulsing with bioluminescent veins, its multiple serpentine limbs curling in anticipation, and a mouth lined with rows upon rows of jagged, needle-like fangs. Ethan's stomach dropped. You have got to be kidding me. The tribunal's voice echoed once more. The rite of proving shall be held at dawn. Should the human Ethan Calloway emerge victorious, the bond shall be considered fulfilled and honored. If he falls, the vow shall be nullified. Ethan turned to Zyara, his voice flat. Did you know about this? She hesitated only a moment too long. Yes. Ethan closed his eyes. I hate everything about today. The trial of the bond. The crowd roared as Ethan stepped onto the platform, the glowing battlefield pulsing beneath his feet. The air was electric, charged with the weight of tradition, of thousands of years of history pressing down upon him. Across the arena, the beast that was meant to test his worthiness uncoiled from its resting position, its many eyes locking onto him, reading him, studying him. Zyara stood in the tribunal's viewing area, watching with unreadable intensity. She had told him, briefly, that the beast was not meant to kill him outright, that it would test his resolve, his skill, his ability to adapt and endure. If he failed, it would not be a dishonorable death, but it would be a clear sign that he was unworthy of keeping the bond. Ethan clenched his fists. He wasn't a warrior. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't some legendary fighter destined to slay monsters in alien arenas. But he was stubborn, and he wasn't going to let some giant snake-cat hybrid decide his future. The battle that followed was a blur of instinct, survival, and sheer reckless determination. He dodged, rolled, used every ounce of speed and wit to stay one step ahead of the beast's snapping fangs, waiting, watching, searching for the right moment to strike. When he finally landed a blow using the creature's own momentum against it, forcing it into one of the shifting platform traps, was not through strength, but sheer cleverness. When the beast stilled, acknowledging his victory, the tribunal rose. The bond is honored. And in that moment, as the crowd roared in approval, as Zyara descended onto the arena floor, her eyes gleaming with something strange and unreadable, Ethan realized that he had just changed the course of his life forever.